She left her husband, children, and a sick father for a rich lover, but years later, a chance meeting turns everything upside down. Write in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The sound of wind tapping gently against the bedroom window was the first thing Malik noticed that morning. It was still dark, that hour just before dawn, when the world feels suspended in quiet expectation. His body ached from a restless night, and the soft hum of the baby monitor on the nightstand buzzed with static and silence. He reached out instinctively across the bed, seeking the warmth of Emily, the curve of her back, the familiar shape of her shoulder, but all he found was cold, empty space. He sat up, blinking, confused for a second. Maybe she had gone to check on the baby. Maybe to the bathroom. Maybe she had just stepped outside to breathe, something she often did when the pressure of the house felt too much. He stood up and glanced around the dimly lit room. Her slippers were gone. Her robe, the one she always left draped across the chair by the closet, was missing too. Malik walked through the hallway quietly, his socked feet making no sound on the hardwood floors. The soft glow from the baby's room leaked into the hallway. He stepped in and found his daughter, Leah, still fast asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling under a pink blanket. In the next room, Trey, their 7-year-old son, lay sprawled across his twin bed, clutching his favorite action figure, breathing slow and deep. Everything looked as it should. Everything but the silence. He checked the bathroom. Empty. The kitchen. Dark and untouched. His father's room. Quiet. The old man, confined to a wheelchair after a stroke 2 years ago, was still sleeping, his face partially lit by the hallway light. Malik leaned against the doorway for a moment, watching his father breathe, trying to settle the knot forming in his stomach. And then he saw it. A folded piece of paper on the kitchen table, placed neatly beside the salt shaker, as if it were just a note reminding someone to buy milk. But Malik knew, even before he picked it up, that it wasn't that kind of note. His name was written across the top in the familiar curves of Emily's handwriting. He unfolded it slowly. Malik, I'm sorry. I don't have the words to make this easier, and I doubt you'll understand, but I need to be honest. I've met someone. His name is Gregory. He's successful, stable, and I feel safe with him in a way I never did here. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. I didn't want it to happen like this, but I couldn't live a lie anymore. I can't keep playing the roles everyone expects. Wife, mother, nursemaid to your father. I need a different life. A life where I feel like more than a caretaker or a struggling woman in a crumbling home. I know this is cruel, but I'm leaving. I'm not coming back. Gregory doesn't want kids, and I'm not strong enough to fight for custody. I know you'll take care of them. You've always been good with them. And your father, he's yours now. Do what you want. Put him in a home. Keep him. I don't care. I need to be free. Please don't try to find me. Emily. Malik read the letter 3 times. Each time he found himself hoping the words would rearrange themselves, that maybe he had misunderstood, but the ink remained the same, the meaning no softer with repetition. She was gone. Just gone. No warning, no last argument, no pleading. Only silence and a note that turned his life upside down in less than 200 words. He stood there for what felt like an hour, the letter trembling in his hand, though he wasn't sure if it was his fingers or his entire soul shaken. A low laugh escaped his throat, dry, shocked, almost amused by the absurdity of it all. And then came the tears. Uninvited, unstoppable, rolling down his cheeks as he sank to the floor and pressed his forehead to his knees. Outside, the wind picked up. Morning was still a distant idea. Eventually, he stood and walked back to the bedroom. He opened the closet. Half of it was empty. Drawers were left slightly ajar, some still full of old clothes she didn't bother to take. He opened her jewelry box, empty. The photo of their wedding day on the nightstand was still there, like a cruel joke. His hands moved mechanically as he dressed. He wasn't sure why, maybe to escape the silence, maybe to pretend he still had control. He left the house and walked the block slowly, as if expecting to see her stepping out of a car, calling to him with some explanation, some excuse that would undo the weight of what she had written. But the streets were empty, the world indifferent. He didn't remember how long he walked. When he returned, the sun was rising, casting gold through the windows. Trey was awake and calling for breakfast. Leah was crying softly. His father was stirring, asking if the day had started. Malik set the letter on the counter, made his way to his son's room, and knelt beside the bed. Trey looked at him with sleepy eyes. "Where's Mommy?" Malik hesitated. He wanted to lie, wanted to say she had gone to the store, to work, to run an errand, but something told him not to. "She had to go somewhere," he said quietly. "She won't be back for a while." Trey looked confused. Then he turned away, silent. Malik kissed his forehead and went to pick up Leah. In the living room, his father, Joseph, was trying to sit up in his chair. The man looked older than he had yesterday, sagging deeper into himself, eyes sunken with knowing. "She left, didn't she?" Joseph asked. Malik nodded. The old man closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, son. I didn't protect her from herself." Malik walked over and placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "It's not your fault." They sat like that in silence for a while. Father and son, both left behind, both trying to gather what pieces remained. The day unfolded in slow, heavy moments. Malik prepared cereal with shaking hands, changed Leah's diaper while holding back tears. He dressed Trey and made sure he got on the bus. He sat with his father and helped him through his morning routine. Everything moved like a machine losing oil, stiff, grating, barely holding together. By the time night came, Malik sat on the living room floor, his back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. Leah was finally asleep. Trey had cried himself into a nap after asking a dozen times why Mama hadn't called. Joseph sat in silence, staring out the window. The weight of it all settled on Malik's shoulders like cement. His heart ached with a hollow kind of pain, one that no sleep could fix. He wondered how long he could keep this up. How long before something broke? He didn't sleep that night, nor the night after. Instead, he kept moving, feeding, cleaning, managing, because someone had to. But deep inside, something had cracked. He was no longer just a husband or a son. He was the only one left to keep the world from falling apart. The days that followed Emily's departure unfolded like an endless loop, each indistinguishable from the last, stitched together by exhaustion and necessity. Malik no longer looked at the calendar. He couldn't tell you if it was a Tuesday or a Saturday. The world had narrowed into a relentless cycle of survival, feeding the children, managing his father's care, trying, often failing, to maintain any sense of normalcy. Time became something he measured by the weight of dirty laundry and the dwindling level of formula in the canister above the fridge. He barely slept. Leah still woke 2, sometimes 3 times a night, her cries piercing the silence like a warning bell. Trey had begun wetting the bed again and would wake up sobbing, confused and ashamed. Joseph, though quiet and undemanding, required constant assistance, medications, bathing, transfers from the bed to his wheelchair and back again. Malik moved through the motions like a ghost in his own home, a man whose purpose had narrowed to keeping others alive. His job, once a source of pride and identity, became a casualty within the first week. He'd worked as a full-time driver for a small charter company, ferrying tourists and business people between the airport and hotels. The hours were long but steady, and the tips helped. But now, with no one to watch the kids or tend to his father, he had no choice but to call out repeatedly. By the third missed shift, his manager called him in, not to offer help or understanding, but to tell him they needed someone more reliable. Malik didn't argue. He couldn't. There was no energy left for resistance. Instead, he turned to the gig economy, signing up with delivery apps and driving late into the night, while his father tried to manage the children as best he could. Joseph insisted on helping. He would wheel himself from room to room, singing old songs to calm Leah, reading to Trey in a slow, gravelly voice. But his body betrayed him more often now, and Malik would often return home to find the man slumped in his chair, asleep from exhaustion or slumped over from pain. The money was barely enough. Groceries grew sparse. The car needed repairs Malik couldn't afford. He began pawning things: his old guitar, their second television, even Emily's unused sewing machine, which had sat untouched for years but still carried the scent of her hand lotion. Pride took a backseat to necessity, and still the pressure built. Leah developed a rash that wouldn't go away. Trey became sullen, often refusing to eat or speak, instead lying on the couch with his head buried beneath a blanket. His drawings, once filled with superheroes and animals, turned into strange, abstract shapes, thick black lines that slashed across the page. Malik tried to reach him, tried to speak gently, to be patient, but he was running on fumes. Sometimes his voice would rise despite himself, and Trey would flinch and retreat even further into silence. The apartment itself seemed to close in around them. Dishes piled up faster than they could be washed. The laundry basket overflowed. Trash gathered in corners Malik hadn't noticed until the smell forced his attention. The baby monitor crackled constantly, a ceaseless reminder of the tiny life dependent on him. He made lists, schedules, charts, anything to impose order on the chaos, but they only reminded him of how much he was failing. One night, as the children finally slept and Joseph sat quietly watching late-night reruns, Malik took the minivan and drove, not to deliver food or pick up groceries, but just to move, to breathe, to escape. He found himself parked outside the social services building. It was closed, of course, the lights off, the lobby dark, but he sat there for a long time, his phone in his hand, the contact page for Child Protective Services open on the screen. His thumb hovered over the call button. A voice inside him whispered that maybe this was the responsible thing. Maybe someone else could give Trey and Leah what they needed: stability, structure, safety. Maybe another family could give Joseph a proper home with medical staff and routines and peace. Maybe he wasn't enough. He gripped the phone tighter, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. Then he pictured Trey's face the night before, crumpling in confusion when Malik yelled over a spilled glass of milk. He remembered Leah's tiny hands clinging to his shirt as she drifted off in his arms. He saw Joseph, sitting by the window every morning, waiting for the sun to hit the corner of the couch where he liked to read. Malik turned off the phone. He drove back home slowly, his hands tight on the wheel. The next day was worse. Leah's rash had spread, and she cried all morning. Joseph had an accident and refused to let Malik clean him, too ashamed to meet his son's eyes. Trey threw his cereal bowl across the room, then locked himself in the bathroom for an hour. Malik sat on the floor outside the door, speaking softly, apologizing, until Trey finally emerged with tear-streaked cheeks and a whisper, "When is she coming back?" Malik had no answer. That night, after putting the kids to bed, he scrubbed the bathroom floor until his knees ached, then took a shower so hot his skin turned red. He sat on the floor of the bathtub and the water pouring over him and wept until his body trembled with exhaustion. He began avoiding mirrors. He didn't recognize the man staring back. Hollow eyes, cracked lips, unshaven jaw. His clothes hung loosely now, his once proud shoulders sagging under the invisible weight of responsibility. His phone buzzed with messages he no longer answered. Friends, co-workers, even Emily's sister reached out. But Malik ignored them all. What was there to say? One evening, as he changed a soiled diaper with one hand while stirring pasta with the other, Trey stood in the kitchen doorway. "I want cereal," he said. "We're having spaghetti tonight, bud," Malik replied without turning. "I want cereal, like she used to make." Malik paused. The pasta bubbled behind him, the scent of overcooked tomato sauce filling the air. "Emily's gone, Trey." The boy's face twisted in frustration. "You're not her. You're not good at anything." Before Malik could respond, Trey stomped away, his door slamming shut. Joseph, who had been watching silently from the hallway, rolled into the kitchen. "He didn't mean it," he said quietly. "I know," Malik replied. "He's hurting." "So am I." Joseph nodded slowly. "But you're still here." Malik blinked, the words hanging in the air like a revelation. He was still here. That counted for something, didn't it? A week later, the baby ran out of formula. Malik had no cash. The card declined at the store. Embarrassed, he returned home empty-handed, praying that she would sleep through the night. Instead, Leah screamed for hours, her cries sharp and insistent. Trey tried to help, offering a bottle of water and singing a lullaby off-key. Joseph sat helplessly in his chair, his fists clenched. At dawn, Malik sat on the couch, eyes bloodshot, arms limp at his sides. The apartment smelled of sweat, formula, and desperation. He looked around the room at the chipped paint and the scattered toys and thought about what his life had become. He thought about the man he used to be, the man who brought flowers to his wife every Friday, who grilled burgers on weekends, who dreamed of starting his own transport company. He thought about the dreams he buried under diapers and despair. But beneath the exhaustion, a flicker of resolve stirred. He wouldn't quit, not for himself, for them. The next day, he cleaned. It took hours, but he did it. Vacuumed, mopped, scrubbed. He called his old boss and asked about part-time shifts. He posted an ad offering lawn work and odd jobs. He rearranged the apartment so that Joseph's bed faced the window. He cooked pancakes for breakfast. They were burnt, but Trey ate them anyway. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And, as the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Malik stood at the kitchen sink, his hands in warm water, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something like control. It wasn't peace, but it was movement. And for now, that was enough. Spring arrived slowly in Georgia, the cold mornings giving way to moist, warming afternoons, and the scent of damp earth lingering in the air like something waking from sleep. Malik stood at the kitchen sink one Tuesday morning, the sleeves of his faded hoodie pushed up to his elbows, his hands in soapy water. Through the window above the sink, the late morning sun cast a golden rectangle of light across the floor, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel entirely buried. The house wasn't perfect, far from it, but it no longer felt like it was swallowing him whole. The floors were clean, the laundry folded, and the children fed. It had taken nearly every ounce of strength he possessed, but Malik had wrangled the chaos into something resembling a routine. His nights were still short and broken, and his bones ached more than they used to, but there was movement now. Progress. He had managed to pick up a few jobs doing handyman work, mowing lawns, painting fences, fixing leaky pipes in older neighbors' homes. It didn't pay much, but it paid. He worked when the kids were at school or asleep, and Joseph, bless him, had found the strength to step up in ways Malik hadn't expected. Despite his wheelchair and aching joints, the old man had a quiet resolve about him, wheeling through the apartment with determination, helping Trey with homework and singing Leah to sleep with songs from his childhood. Still, Malik knew they were surviving on the edge of a knife. One unexpected bill, one illness, one fall, and it could all collapse again. He tried not to dwell on it, but the tension sat beneath everything he did, humming in his chest like a wire pulled taut. That afternoon, as he prepared to take out the trash, a soft knock came at the door. Surprised, Malik opened it and found a familiar face smiling up at him. A short, round woman in a floral dress and oversized glasses, holding a foil-covered dish. "Morning, sugar," said Miss Louise, his elderly neighbor from 2 doors down. "Thought you could use a hot meal that didn't come out of a can." Malik blinked, touched beyond words. He stepped aside and let her in. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, setting the dish on the counter, "but I did anyway." The smell of baked macaroni and cheese filled the kitchen instantly, warm and cheesy with a hint of paprika. Malik exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by the simple generosity. "I've been watching you," Miss Louise said, her tone matter of fact. "You're doing your best, and Lord knows it ain't easy, but sometimes folks need help, even if they don't ask." Malik lowered his eyes. "I appreciate it. You got good kids, and your father, he's a good man. We don't let good people drown around here. You hear?" That day marked the beginning of something new. Miss Louise started dropping by more often, sometimes with meals, sometimes with just a basket of fresh laundry, or to read stories to Trey while Malik rested. She moved through the apartment like someone reclaiming space from grief, humming gospel tunes and calling everyone baby. Malik had forgotten how much comfort lived in a presence like hers, steady, unshaken, warm. One afternoon, she brought someone with her. Malik was elbow-deep in dishwater again when the knock came, and when he opened the door, Miss Louise was standing there with a young woman beside her, a tall, dark-skinned woman with soft eyes and tight braids pulled back from her face. She looked to be in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, dressed in scrubs and a windbreaker, holding a bag of groceries in one hand. "Here's my niece," Louise said cheerfully. "Kayla. She's staying with me for a while. Used to be a nurse till the hospital let her go. I figured she could help you out some." Malik looked from Louise to Kayla, unsure what to say. Kayla offered a small, polite smile. "I don't want to impose," she said softly, "but I'm good with kids, and I don't mind lending a hand." Something in her tone, quiet but firm, put Malik at ease. He stepped aside and let them both in. That day, Kayla held Leah for the first time while Malik cleaned the living room. The baby stared up at her with wide, curious eyes, and within minutes was asleep in her arms. Trey, usually so guarded, sat beside her on the couch, watching intently as she braided a ribbon into one of Leah's soft curls. Joseph watched all of this from his chair, his eyes narrowed in quiet assessment. Later, he would say nothing, only nod once, as if something had been settled. Over the next week, Kayla became a constant presence. She never stayed overnight, always leaving before dusk, but she came by each morning to help with the children, to prepare meals, to talk with Joseph. She moved gently but efficiently, with a calm that seeped into the walls of the apartment like fresh air. Malik didn't know much about her, but what little he learned came in pieces. She had been married once. She didn't talk about it. She had no children. She didn't explain why. She was from North Carolina originally, but had moved to Georgia a few years ago to help care for her grandmother. After her grandmother passed, she stayed, partly out of habit, partly because she had nowhere else to go. He didn't press her. He understood the language of silence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Trey chase fireflies with a neighbor boy, Kayla turned to Malik and said, "You're doing better than you think." He looked at her, startled by the words. "You don't see it," she continued, "but your kids do. They know you're fighting for them. That matters." Malik didn't respond, but something inside him softened. Her words stayed with him long after she had gone. Weeks passed. The rhythm of life shifted again, this time with less resistance. Kayla brought order. Miss Louise brought warmth. Joseph brought steadiness. And Malik slowly began to bring hope. He started keeping a notebook again, something he hadn't touched since Emily left. In it, he scribbled ideas, plans, reminders. He began sketching out what a small transport business might look like. Routes, costs, schedules. He called old contacts. He researched insurance requirements. It felt ridiculous at first, a fantasy, but it gave him purpose. One evening, after the children were asleep and Joseph had turned in early, Malik found himself sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing a spreadsheet he had printed at the library. Kayla sat across from him, sipping tea. "I didn't know you were a numbers man," she said, glancing at the page. "I used to be," he said. "I had plans, before everything." "You still do?" Malik looked up, met her gaze. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was clear, certain. And, for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe her. Later that night, he stood by Leah's crib, watching her sleep. Trey stirred in the next room, mumbling in his dreams. Joseph's soft snoring drifted from down the hall. Malik breathed in the quiet. It wasn't silence like before. It wasn't heavy or hollow. It was peace. For the first time in months, Malik allowed himself to close his eyes and rest, not just his body, but his mind. There was still a long road ahead. He knew that, but now there were others walking beside him. And that made all the difference. The hum of the neighborhood in early summer had a rhythm all its own. Lawnmowers sputtered in the distance. Children's laughter echoed from down the block, and cicadas sang their midday hymns from hidden places in the trees. Within the walls of Malik's modest apartment, life no longer felt like a storm to be endured. It was still hard, yes, still messy and unpredictable, but it had begun to find its own kind of harmony. The chaos of survival had given way to a slow rebuilding, and in that space, something else had quietly begun to take root. Malik noticed it in the small things. The way Trey ran to the door when Kayla arrived each morning, his face lighting up as he tugged on her hand to show her his newest drawing. The way Leah reached for her without hesitation, laying her head against Kayla's shoulder with the trust only toddlers granted freely. Even Joseph had softened, his eyes warming as he watched her move through the apartment like she belonged, like she had always been there. Kayla never tried to take over. She wasn't loud or overly affectionate. Her presence was quiet, reassuring, solid. She didn't ask many questions, didn't pry into Malek's past or speak much of her own, but over time, the silences between them changed. They became comfortable, no longer heavy with tension, but filled with understanding. They shared coffee in the mornings, laughter over Trey's antics, long glances across the room when Leah did something especially cute or unexpected. Malek found himself looking forward to her visits, to the sound of her voice, to the calm she brought with her. One Sunday afternoon, as the kids napped and Joseph dozed in his chair by the window, Malek and Kayla sat on the front porch sipping sweet tea. The heat pressed against them like a blanket, but neither seemed to mind. Malek had been quiet for a while, lost in thought, his eyes following a stray cat weaving its way along the sidewalk. "I ever tell you I wanted to start my own transport company?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself with the confession. Kayla turned to him, eyebrows raised. "No, but I can see it." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I had plans. Before all of this, before the kids, before Emily, I used to sketch out business models for fun. Routes, vehicle types, employee benefits, all of it. Sounded crazy at the time. Doesn't sound crazy now." He looked at her skeptical. "I don't even have the money to fix my brakes, let alone launch a company." "Dreams don't cost anything," she said. "And you've already done the hard part. You kept your family together. You survived the worst. That tells me you could handle a business." Malek didn't answer right away. He let her words settle, tasting their truth. She believed in him, and it wasn't blind faith, wasn't sympathy, it was recognition. She saw him. Over the following weeks, the idea began to grow again. Slowly, like something thawing after a long freeze. Malek dug out his old notebooks, covered in dust and forgotten in a box beneath his bed. He found spreadsheets he'd created years ago, handwritten notes in the margins about insurance policies and vehicle maintenance schedules. At night, after the children were in bed and the apartment had quieted, he would sit at the kitchen table, Kayla across from him, and they would brainstorm together. Kayla brought her own talents to the table. She was organized, sharp, and pragmatic. Her years in nursing had taught her how to plan, how to prioritize, how to keep her head even when everything around her fell apart. She helped Malek break the project down into manageable steps, offered ideas he hadn't considered. It became their shared language. Plans whispered over dishes, sketches drawn on napkins, half jokes about someday hiring a staff with matching uniforms. Through it all, something deeper stirred. Malek found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her hands moved when she spoke, the softness in her voice when she read to Leah. He noticed how her laughter lingered in the corners of the room, how Trey had started calling her Miss K like it was second nature. One night, after she had left and the house had gone still, Joseph spoke from his spot by the window. "You love her?" he said. Malek blinked, startled. "What?" Joseph turned his head, his face lined and tired but knowing. "I've seen the way you look at her, the way the house changes when she's here." Malek opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. There was no point. "I don't know if she feels the same," he said quietly. Joseph chuckled. "Son, that woman shows up here every day. She cooks, she plays with your kids, she listens to your foolish dreams about a business. She's either deeply in love or completely out of her mind." Malek smiled, but the doubt lingered. He didn't want to rush something fragile. He had rushed before, with Emily, and he had paid dearly. Days passed, then weeks. The seasons crept closer to fall, and with them came Trey's 8th birthday. Malik had worried he wouldn't be able to do anything special, but Kayla stepped in with quiet efficiency. She helped him plan a small party in the backyard, complete with homemade cupcakes, paper hats, and balloons. The joy on Trey's face that day lit up the entire street. Friends from school came, neighbors brought snacks, and for a few hours the world outside their fence didn't exist. Kayla wore a yellow dress, her hair braided back, and when Malik looked at her holding Leah, surrounded by laughter and sunlight, his breath caught. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the sun had slipped below the horizon, Malik stood at the sink, rinsing dishes. Kayla joined him, towel in hand. "You pulled it off," she said. "We pulled it off," he corrected. She smiled, and for a moment, they stood in the quiet, just watching each other. "I've been meaning to ask," Malik said, drying his hands. "Have you ever thought about staying? Not just during the day, really staying, living here?" Her smile faltered just slightly. She looked down, then away. "Malik, I need to tell you something." He waited, heart suddenly pounding. "I can't have children," she said, her voice low. "I was pregnant once. My ex, he wasn't a good man, there was abuse. I lost the baby, and the doctors said it damaged something inside. Physically, emotionally, I don't know." Malik reached out instinctively, placing a hand on her arm. "You don't have to." "I do," she said, meeting his gaze. "Because if we go any further, you need to know. I'm broken in ways you can't fix. I carry things, regrets, guilt. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I'm back there." Malik's throat tightened. "Kayla, you're not broken, you're brave. You saved this family when we were falling apart. You gave us back our breath." She shook her head, tears welling. "I don't want a life of fear or pain or power games. I don't want to be owned or controlled. I just want peace. I want a quiet kind of happy. No mansions, no promises I can't believe in, just something real." "You have that," Malik said, his voice firm. "Right here, with us." Her tears spilled then, slow and silent. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. That night, Kayla didn't go home. She stayed. The next morning, Joseph found them in the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. He grunted approvingly, then asked Kayla if she'd be making her sweet potato hash again. The heart of the house had begun to beat again. And this time, it beat in rhythm with something real. The days after Kayla stayed that first night passed with a quiet gentleness that Malik had never quite known before. It was as if the apartment, once heavy with sorrow and weariness, had exhaled and finally allowed itself to breathe. Routines remained the same. Morning chaos with the kids, afternoon meals, nighttime stories, but there was a warmth to it now, a steadiness rooted not in necessity, but in choice. Kayla didn't move in officially. She brought no suitcases, claimed no drawers, and never said the words aloud. But the way she was there in the morning, brushing Leah's hair or helping Trey find his sneakers, made it clear to everyone in the house that she was no longer just visiting. She belonged. Joseph treated the change with a nod and a knowing look. Trey began calling her simply Kay, dropping the miss as though they had skipped past formality into something closer to kinship. Leah, in her toddler simplicity, clung to Kayla's leg like a second shadow. Malik watched all of this unfold with cautious joy. It had taken him so long to find his footing after Emily's departure, and he had not expected to find someone, so steady in the aftermath. But joy, Malik had learned, rarely came without the echo of fear. He felt it late at night when the house fell silent, when he lay beside Kayla and listened to the rhythm of her breath. steady but guarded, as though even in sleep she braced for something. He saw it in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, when she stared too long at nothing, her fingers twitching with remembered tension. She never spoke of her past unless prompted, and even then her answers were brief, her voice clipped and dry. One evening, after a long day spent cleaning out the storage closet to make room for a second-hand play kitchen for Leah, Malik sat across from Kayla at the kitchen table. She was folding clothes, sorting socks into neat piles. He watched her for a long moment, the way her fingers moved with deliberate precision. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She didn't look up. "You can always ask. Why did you stay?" She paused mid-fold, then placed the sock in the basket before meeting his gaze. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "Because the kids needed someone. Because I needed to feel useful again." "And now?" She hesitated. Her eyes dropped to her hands. "Now, I don't want to leave," she said, "but that doesn't mean I'm not scared." Malik nodded, sensing more beneath her words. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "You don't have to be scared here." "I know," she whispered, "but fear doesn't always care about truth." That night, after the kids were asleep and the apartment had quieted, Kayla sat beside Malik on the couch. The television played some forgettable sitcom in the background, its laugh track distant and hollow. Kayla turned to him, her face lit only by the flickering screen. "When I was pregnant," she said, her voice low, "I was still telling myself he wasn't really that bad." Malik turned off the television. The silence that followed was immediate and full. "I had a small bruise on my ribs," she continued. "I told people I slipped on wet tile. He said he was just angry, that he hadn't meant to push me so hard. I believed him because I wanted to, because I was scared of what it meant if I didn't." Malik said nothing, only moved his hand to hers again, grounding her. "I lost the baby in the emergency room. The nurse didn't even ask what happened. She just handed me paperwork and told me to rest. He didn't come. Said he had a meeting." She let out a bitter laugh. "That night, I went home and packed a bag. I left while he was sleeping. I never went back." Malik felt the weight of her story settle between them, and with it came a new understanding. The strength he'd seen in her was not born from ease or protection. It had been forged in the crucible of pain, refined by survival. "I'm sorry," he said finally. She shook her head. "Don't be. I'm not telling you because I want sympathy. I'm telling you because you need to know what you're getting into." "I know," he said, "and I still want it." She looked at him then, something in her gaze searching, fragile. "I'm not sure I know how to do this, be someone's future." Malik leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're not building a future in a day," he said. "We're just choosing each other every morning. That's enough." In the weeks that followed, Kayla's steps grew surer. She started humming while she cooked. She let Leah braid her hair, let Trey teach her card games. She still had moments, quiet spells when her smile dimmed or her hands stilled mid-task, but they passed more quickly now. The apartment, once filled with hesitation and ghosts, felt whole. Then, on a humid afternoon in early August, Kayla fainted in the kitchen. Malik caught her just before she hit the floor, cradling her in his arms as Joseph called 911. The paramedics came quickly, their voices calm and professional, their movements swift. At the hospital, while she rested in the bed beside him, a nurse came in with a clipboard and a small smile. "You're about 8 weeks along," she said. Malik stared at her, stunned. Kayla blinked. "That's not possible." The nurse tilted her head. You've had irregular cycles before? Kayla nodded slowly. Yes, and I was told I couldn't conceive, that the damage was permanent. Well, the nurse said with a shrug, miracles happen. Malik sat beside her long after the nurse left, his hand wrapped around hers. Kayla stared at the ceiling. I don't know how to feel. You don't have to know, he said. We'll figure it out together. The weeks that followed were a blur of appointments, anxiety, and quiet joy. Kayla was terrified. Malik could see it in the way she triple-checked every vitamin bottle, and the way she flinched with every cramp or twinge. But he was there. Every step, every echo, every breath. He read books, asked questions, held her hand through every scan. When the ultrasound technician turned the screen toward them and said, "There's the heartbeat," Kayla cried. Malik kissed her temple and whispered, "You're not alone." Joseph cried too, though he pretended it was just dust in his eye. Trey announced to anyone who would listen that he was going to be a big brother again, and Leah started placing her stuffed animals on Kayla's belly to help the baby grow. One quiet evening, as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies return, Kayla leaned against Malik's shoulder. "Do you remember what I said about not wanting wealth or power or any of that?" He nodded. I think this is what I meant. This peace, this family. It's not flashy, it's not perfect, but it's real, and I've never had anything real before." Malik kissed the top of her head. "You do now." The shadows of her past hadn't vanished. They never would, but they no longer ruled her. They no longer stood between her and the life she had begun to build. And when Kayla placed Malik's hand over her stomach that night, guiding his fingers to where their child was growing, he felt it. The proof that something beautiful could rise from ruin. The heart was still beating. And so were they. The first chill of autumn crept into the Georgia air just as the leaves began to change, golden and amber flares flickering across the treetops in Malik's neighborhood. The apartment, which once had felt like a place of confinement, now echoed with the rhythms of a growing, bustling family. Days had settled into a pattern, not perfect, but steady. Trey woke up early for school, his face glowing with the quiet confidence of a boy who had survived turbulence and found something solid to stand on. Leah, now nearly 4, no longer clung to Malik's leg every time he left the room, but instead followed Kayla everywhere with the trust of a child who had been loved back to life. And Kayla. She moved with a kind of grace now that had been absent when they met, her steps lighter, her shoulders less burdened. There were still moments when the shadows crept in. Malik saw them in her eyes from time to time, a flicker of something unspoken, but they passed more quickly, softened by the rhythm of family and the touch of his hand. Her pregnancy had brought unexpected anxieties, yes, but also healing. The child growing inside her was not a bandage on the past, but a promise of the future. Something she had once believed impossible now stirred beneath her skin with the strength of hope. Malik had built structure around their lives, not only emotionally, but practically. He no longer delivered food late at night or chased odd jobs at dawn. With Kayla's help, he had formalized the small business idea that had once been a scribble in an old notebook. What started as a single second-hand van with a makeshift logo now included 2 used but reliable vehicles and a third on lease. Malik and Company was officially registered with the city. He specialized in airport runs, assisted transportation for seniors, and package delivery for local businesses. The community had responded with enthusiasm. He had earned their trust not through flashy branding or discounts, but through consistency and respect. What made it work wasn't just Malik's drive or Kayla's organization, though both were vital. It was the way they approached it together, each decision made over the kitchen table while the children played in the background. Each problem met with a shared glance and a quiet nod. Malik had started hiring help, too, single fathers like him, men who had slipped through the cracks of other systems but were eager to work, to rebuild. One of them, Antoine, had just gotten custody of his daughter and cried when Malik offered him flexible hours and weekends off. Joseph had changed, too. Though his body remained fragile, his spirit had rebounded. He no longer spent afternoons staring out the window in silence. Now he read stories to the children, played board games with Trey, and often fell asleep with Leah curled up beside him on the couch. Some days were harder than others. His joints ached more in the cold, and he needed more help getting out of bed. But his pride had softened, and his gratitude was visible in every smile, every quiet thank you whispered when he thought no one was listening. They were not wealthy. The apartment was still small, and every dollar was spoken for before it even landed in their hands. But the air inside that home was different now. Laughter lived in the corners. The walls carried the scent of cinnamon and baby lotion. Music played on weekend mornings as pancakes sizzled on the stove, and little feet ran down the hall, leaving trails of toy cars and mismatched socks. It was a life built piece by piece, not from convenience or ease, but from resilience and choice. One afternoon, as the wind picked up and scattered leaves across the porch, Kayla sat in the nursery they had slowly pieced together from thrift store finds and donated furniture. Malik stood in the doorway, watching her fold tiny onesies with a look on her face he hadn't seen before. Not worry, not fear, something closer to wonder. "You ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, not looking up. "Every day," Malik said, stepping inside. She turned to him, her belly round and firm beneath her sweater. "I never thought I'd feel this again. Safety, joy, anticipation. You earned it," he said gently, resting his hand on her shoulder. "No," she replied, "we built it, together." Trey burst into the room moments later, holding a certificate from school. "I got Student of the Week," he announced, beaming. Malik lifted him into a hug while Kayla clapped, her eyes shining. "Look at you," she said. "You're on a roll." "I want to be like Dad," Trey said. "Have my own business someday." Malik laughed. "Let's start with finishing elementary school." Leah ran in next, singing a made-up song about apples and pumpkins, and Kayla smiled as the chaos swirled around her. Her eyes met Malik's over the heads of the children, and in that look, everything was spoken. Gratitude, trust, love. A few weeks later, on a crisp November morning, Kayla went into labor. Malik drove her to the hospital with Joseph in the passenger seat and the kids tucked safely at Miss Louise's. The labor was long and exhausting, but when the doctor placed a healthy baby boy in Kayla's arms, the room seemed to exhale. They named him Caleb. He had Kayla's nose and Malik's eyes, and when Trey and Leah met him the next day, they declared him the best baby ever, as if they'd had any previous frame of reference. Joseph wept openly, holding the child in trembling hands, whispering stories from his own childhood, as if he could pass them through the baby's skin into his bones. Life did not slow down. The sleepless nights returned. Diapers and feedings and colic reminded Malik and Kayla what it meant to start over, but this time they did it with a foundation beneath them, a family. Malik balanced late-night feeds with early morning work runs. Kayla managed baby schedules with astonishing calm, even as she recovered. Trey helped where he could, proudly holding bottles and singing lullabies. Leah insisted she was now the big sister boss. Their world expanded but did not fracture. One evening, as snow began to fall softly against the window panes, Malik stood on the porch holding Caleb in his arms. The baby slept soundly against his chest, wrapped in a knit blanket Joseph had saved from when Malik himself was born. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that only came after a long, full day. Behind him, the house glowed. Joseph read a book by the lamp. Trey and Leah argued over a board game, and Kayla hummed in the kitchen, preparing bottles for the night ahead. Malik looked out at the street, thinking about the nights he used to walk it alone, not knowing how he'd survive the next day. The man he was then would not recognize the life he had now, but Malik knew. He remembered every moment that brought him here, the heartbreak, the exhaustion, the fear. And now, holding his son beneath a sky thick with stars and falling snow, he felt a peace so deep it was almost unfamiliar. Inside, Kayla stepped out to join him, sliding her arm around his waist. "Cold?" he asked. "A little," she said, resting her head against his shoulder, "but worth it." They stood there together, watching the snow settle over the neighborhood, not speaking, not needing to. The quiet between them was full, rich with memory and meaning. They were not a traditional family. There had been no fairy tale wedding, no carefully mapped out plan. What they had was messier, harder, more fragile, and infinitely more real. And as the wind whispered through the trees and the lights of their home shimmered through the falling flakes, Malik knew without doubt, this was the family he was always meant to build, one he had chosen, one that had chosen him back. The last of winter melted into early spring, and with it came the bloom of dogwoods along the sidewalks and the warm breeze that carried the scent of damp earth and fresh-cut grass through the neighborhood. The house that once knew only tension and silence had grown noisy with life. Malik's apartment, now more than a home, had become a world in itself, a place where breakfast was rarely quiet, where toys rolled into hallways like tumbleweeds, and where laughter echoed from corner to corner as if to remind everyone inside that the past, though never forgotten, no longer ruled the present. Caleb was nearing 6 months. He had Kayla's alert eyes and Malik's patient expression. He was curious and calm, content to watch his siblings race around the living room as if he already understood that his turn would come. Trey had become protective in a way that went beyond his years, picking up the baby at the smallest whimper, making bottles without being asked. Leah, still wild and sunbright, took her role as big sister boss seriously, demanding bedtime songs and morning kisses with the kind of confident authority only a 4-year-old could manage. Joseph, slower now and sometimes forgetful, remained the quiet anchor. He spent hours reading by the window or napping with Caleb curled against his chest, as if time had begun folding backward in a tender loop. Kayla moved through it all with the grace of someone who had found her center. She had not lost her caution. There were still nights when dreams pulled her into restless sleep, when she'd wake with her breath caught in her throat, but she had learned to let herself lean. On Malik, on the family they'd built. She had accepted, with a quiet kind of courage, that love could last if you let it grow slowly and tend it daily. Malik's business was thriving in the way small, honest work thrives when given time and purpose. He had 4 vans now, each of them painted clean white with Malik and Company Transport, moving with care, in navy blue lettering across the side. They served the city and the surrounding suburbs, and though they never made headlines, they made lives easier. Seniors arrived at their appointments on time. Single parents got weekend help. Packages were delivered with a smile and a thank you. Malik had hired a handful of local drivers, all of them chosen not for resumes, but for character. Men who had struggled, fallen, and clawed their way back like he had. He offered fair pay, flexibility, and something rarer: belief. The family had moved too. Not far, just 3 streets over, but the new place was larger, with a fenced yard and a covered porch where Kayla liked to drink tea while Caleb napped beside her. There were still bills to juggle and weeks where groceries had to be stretched thin, but they no longer lived with the gnawing uncertainty of not knowing whether the lights would stay on or the car would start. They lived, fully and intentionally, and each day that passed felt like one step farther from the edge. It was during one of his business trips to a nearby town that Malik found himself parked outside a gas station just off the interstate. He had made a drop-off earlier than expected and decided to grab coffee before heading home. It was a small, nondescript place, flickering fluorescent lights, a cracked soda machine outside. The smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. He walked inside, nodding to the cashier, and poured himself a cup. When he turned around, she was there. Emily. He recognized her instantly, though everything about her had dimmed. Her once shining blonde hair hung limp and uneven around her face. Her clothes were clean, but ill-fitting. Her eyes shadowed, lined with sleepless years. She stood behind the counter, holding a rag and a stack of receipts. For a moment, she didn't see him. Then she looked up. Their eyes met. The air between them seemed to tighten, then freeze altogether. Emily's mouth opened slightly, and she stepped forward, the rag falling from her hand. "Malik," she said, her voice uncertain, hoarse, like she hadn't spoken his name in a very long time. He didn't speak at first. His hands remained calm around the coffee cup. He was surprised to find there was no anger in him, no swelling tide of old betrayal, only a quiet sense of finality. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she said. Malik nodded. "Neither did I." She hesitated, glancing down at the counter. I heard from someone in town that you started a business, and that you remarried." He didn't correct her. It wasn't necessary. "We're doing well," he said. Emily blinked, and he saw the flicker of something behind her eyes. Regret, maybe envy, maybe just recognition. She looked thinner than she had before, older in ways that had nothing to do with time. "I was stupid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was chasing happiness, but I was just running from work I didn't want to do. Real life, it's harder than I thought." Malik didn't respond, not because he was cruel, but because he had nothing left to give to that part of his life. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken in the years of silence that followed her leaving. She looked at him again, her eyes wet. "Are the kids? Are they okay?" "They're great," he said. "Smart, happy." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm glad. I really am. I wasn't ready, and I ruined a lot of things." Malik took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down on the counter. "Take care of yourself," he said gently. Emily opened her mouth as if to say more, but he had already turned. He walked out of the gas station without looking back. The drive home was quiet. The sky had turned that soft pink of late afternoon, the sun dipping low against the tree line. Malik let the road carry him forward, his thoughts drifting not to what might have been, but to what was waiting. When he pulled into the driveway, Caleb's face appeared in the window, pressed against the glass with wide, eager eyes. Trey opened the front door before Malik had even turned off the engine, shouting, "Daddy's home!" Kayla followed behind, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile soft and steady. Malik stepped inside, scooping up Caleb and kissing the top of his head, ruffling Trey's hair, lifting Leah as she wrapped herself around his leg like ivy. "How was the drive?" Kayla asked. "Long," he said, setting down his keys, "but it ended exactly where I wanted it to." She leaned in and kissed him, brief but full. "Welcome home." Joseph was sitting at the table, reading an old paperback novel, a blanket draped over his lap. He looked up and gave Malik a tired but satisfied nod, as if to say, "We're still here. We're still standing." That night, after the kids were in bed and the house had gone still, Malik and Kayla sat on the back porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the stars emerge one by one. The air was cool but not biting. The silence was not empty. Malik thought about everything he had walked through, the nights of doubt, the mornings of fear, the exhaustion that once made him question whether he could keep going. He thought about the man he had become, the family they had built, the home they had created not from ease, but from choice. He didn't regret the pain. He didn't regret the struggle, because every jagged step had led him here. Kayla reached for his hand. He took it. No words were needed. There, beneath the sky, surrounded by the life he never thought he'd have, Malik understood what peace really was. It wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the presence of meaning, and he had found it, at last, without regret. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos and stay tuned for what's coming next. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Thank you for watching.